Of the Artisans of Steel podcast. Let's see. I'm going to jump over to the chat and make sure that's up. I'm here with Josh Smith of Josh Smith Knives, also of Montana Knife Company, which is now what, 2-year-old company?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Depends on when we decide our official start date was.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited to get into the conversation with Josh because it's funny because you're only a couple of years older than me, but I consider you an old school maker.
That's all the gray hair.
It's all the gray hair. No, it's because you've been in this since you're 15, and we'll touch a little bit on your past and how you got started and what's not. But you've been on other great podcasts like the Full Blast podcast and many other non-knife making podcasts where you tell your story that we can definitely refer people to. But before we get into the podcast, I want to give a quick shout out to all of the super sponsors over on the Patreon. If you go to patreon.com/Mount Fire Arts, you can sign up and at least sign up at the illuminated individual level or higher to be able to be part of these live conversations. And join the conversation, ask questions of these extremely talented, knowledgeable, and wise makers. Maybe it is the gray hair.
Yeah.
I'm just going to keep making old people references.
I feel like I should be getting a social security check.
All right. So the shout outs are going to be for Mr. Josh A. Weston on Instagram. He's got these cuff knives that are really sweet. You got to go check those out. He's also Dragon Forge Experience or EXP on Instagram. Then we got Kari Rakonen, Rocco Knives. We got Tony Sasma of TNT Forge. We got Mr. Gabe Fletcher of Anchorage Brewing, who I'm going to be up visiting in July. I think we got some fun stuff lined up.
Fishing.
Yeah, part of it is going to be doing some fishing. Mr. Aiden McKinnon, who I just had a great conversation with the other day about possibly trying to do some cool stuff over in Australia. He's Cutthroat Australia on Instagram. We got Maritime Knife Supply, great resource, especially for Canadian makers. Actually, Maritime was one of your sponsors for a while.
No, they're great. They still are. I just need to record a podcast.
And so they're a great source of materials, whether it's powdered steel, handle materials, pins, glue, grinders, anvils, all kinds, like basically anything you need to get the work done. You're good to go. Let's see.
Hi, honey.
Hi, Sarah.
Fishing. Yeah, she put in the fishing, a little fish thing. How do we sound? We sound all right? We're sharing a mic today. There's a little bit different situation. And then next up, we have Russell Tinsley of Ouzel Finch Beers. Ouzel Finch Beers is a brewery out of Virginia, and they actually have a market that's coming up at the end of the month. Go to Ouzel Finch Beer. Shoot, I don't have their handle on here. Let me pull it up real quick because I don't want to mess it up. But they're doing a market, and you got to go over to their Instagram and get a hold of them. Okay, they are Ouzel Finch Beers, OOZLEFINCHBEERS on Instagram. They have a maker crafting market that's going to be coming up at the end of the month. Get a hold of them if you're nearby to come join and be part of it.
She says I look better than you, though.
That's true. It's true. Damn it. It's always going to be true. Okay, Eric McWright. McWright Handmade. Are you familiar with this guy?
No.
He is a maker out of, now I'm going to totally forget him or where he's from. But I'm pulling it up. He is insanely talented. He's pretty talented. He's been forging and making knives for only a few years now. And his level of skill is phenomenal.
Eric McWright?
Yeah, he's actually been winning awards at like the Texas Blade Show and stuff. It's nuts. He's a super talented forger, and he does a really great job with his Damascus finishing and all that jazz in there. I mean, he makes good stuff.
Yeah,
very solid work. But anyways,
nice
go check out
Stag.
Yeah, go check out McWright Handmade. We got Randy Estep, the Scotch Explorer, he's a fella. He he's over on the East Coast as well. He cruises through and finds scotches and drinks them up and talks about them. And stuff
Really?
like that. Yeah. So I love that. And the Scotch Explorer. I wish I lived closer to him because I don't know about you, but I love Scotch.
I'm a big Scotch guy.
Yeah.
I'm not, but it's an acquired, like, it's just not something I've been around, but like
Sure.
I've got it's kind of like bourbon. People like get really deep down the rabbit holes of
Sure.
these different, I got a guy that's getting me on bourbon. So
Nice.
I'm not real refined yet.
That's all right. You just decide what tastes good, what doesn't taste good.
Yeah.
But tastes do evolve over time for sure. All right, and the last one is Mr. Michael Poor, Red Dragon Forge. He's been working so he works with the Bells out of Oregon.
Yep.
You are familiar
Michael Bell?
Michael Bell and his father. I can't remember his father's name. It's Bob or Bill, but you know them from the Eugene show.
Yeah, I remember them from literally from the 90s.
Oh, yeah.
In the Eugene shows, yep, and their swords and
Yeah. So he's been taking classes with them, and he's hand polishing I think it's like a wakizashi or a smaller kind of Japanese style blade, and it's
a lot of hand work.
It's a lot of hand work, a lot of stone rubbing. And then finally we have Brian Hinnenkamp of Tortuga Blade Works, actually based out of Renton, Washington, not far from me. And I'm actually going to be seeing him this weekend because I'm doing a forge to table event for my kids' school, or not forge to table, farm to table, where I'm going to be doing a forging demonstration. And then that knife is going to get raffled off. It's all like part of a fundraiser thing. So if anybody's interested
That's cool.
in coming to that event, you're local, definitely go to my Instagram where I have the link. I don't have the link memorized right now, but go to my Instagram, check out the link if you're local. We'd love the support. If you're not local, you can't make it, you can still get a hold of a raffle ticket that will help support the school and the fundraiser, and you might get yourself a nice little bench knife. So without further ado, Mr. Josh Smith. So I first became aware of Josh Smith when I was working for Bob Kramer. Bob had this giant bookcase full of old Blade Show magazines, or not Blade Show, but Blade magazines. And I was looking through, I would sit down during breaks or lunch or whatever and just kind of thumb through. And I saw one with this little kid in there, and I was like, holy shit. Because there's an article about this kid that had become a master smith. And I think it was actually an earlier one when you had just first started. And that's when I first became aware of you. And then we met for the first time. I mean, in between seeing him in the magazine and then seeing him in real life, when we competed together on Forge and Fire, I'd been aware of his work, seeing pictures on in different books or online or different like photo galleries and stuff, just doing some research about different knives and especially like Damascus patterns and stuff, because Josh is extremely talented in Damascus making. And so it wasn't until we competed together on Forge and Fire, excuse me, that
oh, did you just call me a loser right there?
No,
I think I heard you. Loser.
I did not. That we actually met and got to know each other and hang out a lot, because being on that set is kind of a very slow, long, drawn out
it's
process,
like
of sitting around,
sharing a prison cell.
Yeah, kind of in a way. You're just sitting in a white room with a few plastic folding chairs and no water.
Yeah,
right.
Waiting for them to come.
It's hot as hell, and there's no water, and it's just it was ridiculous. But
it's not what you envision Hollywood being,
right? But if you don't mind giving just like a quick like 5-10 minute, kind of intro into yourself and how you got started. I know you got started with Rick Dunkerley. He was your coach for baseball.
Mm-hmm.
Out of, what was it, Lincoln?
Yep, in Lincoln. Yeah, he started teaching me. I was 11, invited me up to his shop and started kind of learning. Then kind of transitioned into pretty quickly setting up a grinder at my dad's house, or at our house, and
sure.
Had a lawn mowing business and kind of used that money to buy equipment. And then just when you're a kid, you don't have responsibility, so any money you make off of selling knives, you can just put back in your shop, which I was pretty dedicated to that. So by the time I graduated high school, I really had a pretty legitimate full on knife shop.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, people have kind of heard the story, but I did the journeyman test when I was 15, did the Master Smith test when I was 19. I always, it's a great accomplishment. It was a cool thing for sure. But it's also kind of a weird, like, I always like to tell people, like, was I truly a master at 19? Like, not even in the slightest. In fact, I look back at those knives back then, like, my God, what was I doing? But I think that's also, I don't care if you're 19 or if you're 35 when you pass that test. I really feel like that's the point where you actually know enough and you have the abilities that you're actually really ready to learn at that point. Mm-hmm. You can implement different ideas, you can try new techniques, but you have enough basis of knowledge to really start to expand. I kind of compare it to people who get their black belt. The day they get their black belt,
sure,
are they done learning? And from the people that I know that are in like the martial arts stuff, that's really like the beginning of when you understand the craft well, but it's almost like the more you go, the less you know. Like there's more avenues. Like with the knife making, I feel like just because I passed that test at that point, I wasn't making folders yet. There's so much more with the forging and
sure,
making, whether it's chef's knives or all kinds of different techniques, carving and engraving, and like there's so much in this thing that you could just never stop learning.
Right.
So,
yeah, that's interesting that you say that. Yeah, I never really thought about it from that perspective. Like from when you first start, you obviously know nothing. But as you gain skills, you gain confidence. But you get to a certain level when you're making really good work, but then you also realize at the same time that there's still just so much you don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't really think about that very often.
And it's a challenge because you also, when you're at that stage, like, by that point now, I had gone into making knives full time just a couple of years after that.
Yeah.
Well, now you have this weird balance of you have to make a living, but there's all these things. And I know I'm sure you've struggled with this too. Like there's all this stuff you want to learn and try and do, but you also still need to make money.
Right.
Like if you could be rich and retired, but also 30 years old and learning to make knives would be awesome because you can just do what you want.
Right.
And so it almost feels like it was definitely an advantage. Like I was able to really grow a lot in my knife making skills when I was young because I had no responsibilities. I could make anything I wanted. I could try things and I didn't have to worry about paying the bills.
Yeah.
It's harder for guys that are 30, 35 that all of a sudden just start this and they also somehow have to make a living.
Yeah.
And if you're selling some things and you're taking some orders, it's also hard to say, I don't want to do that. I want to stop and try this other thing that I might not be good at just because I want to learn. So it's a real balance there. But anyway, yeah, off on a tangent. But, it was full-time for years making knives, custom knives. And then the economy of 08 kind of happened, 09 right in there. And if you listen to the news back then, they were telling us that we might be headed into a depression. Like we're in a recession, might be headed for depression. The world's falling. Now, if you watch the news for the last 20 years, the world is always falling. It's always something's always about to go wrong if you turn the TV on. But so I actually took a job back then. I had 4 young kids, and so I took a job as a lineman. I had a friend I was teaching to make knives, and he had a job for the power company where it was 8 to 4:30, making a great wage and benefits and all the stuff that you don't have as a knife maker. Stability,
right?
A steady paycheck.
Yeah.
And so, so I took that job and became a journeyman lineman a few years later, went through that apprenticeship. But I always wanted to start, what I'm doing now, which is this Montana knife company. My coffee pot's making noise. Sorry. It's
just Josh.
It's rinsing.
He's farting.
Yeah. So I did that for about 8 years and then kind of launched this new company, production knife company. So that's kind of where we get to basically today.
Yeah.
In a nutshell.
I want to back up real quick because I feel like I haven't heard in previous conversations that you had how you balanced as a young kid the knife making and school. Like, were you still a good student in school?
I was just good enough to keep my parents off my ass most of the time.
I mean, at 15, were you like, this is what I want to do?
For sure.
Yeah. Because I guess you at 15 is when you got your journeyman Smith. So it was actually earlier. You started in like 13? 12,
Yeah.
13?
Yeah. I mean, I started at 11, but really when I was 12, I was pretty damn serious at it. Like 12, 13 years old. By the time I was 13, I think I joined the ABS when I was 12 or 13. Back then you had to wait 2 years to test for your journeyman. Now you have to wait 3.
Yeah.
And so it was really, I worked on knives before school a lot. I worked on knives after school. I did play sports, so there was always that. Worked for my dad's excavation company in the summer, but there was definitely no doubt. Now I will say that I had enough knife makers, and back then, you got to think this is the early 90s to mid 90s. Back then, there really weren't a lot of full-time knife makers. Like, we're talking a very, very small handful, like a Don Fogg,
right,
a Steve Schwarzer. Very few. I'd say, maybe a couple dozen in the country back then. And so it was just kind of known that, like, you still had to have a job. And my plan was to still take over my parents' excavation business and make knives.
That's an interesting part of like how that culture has shifted to where people nowadays, they're working in a restaurant, or they're working whatever kind of job in an office or whatever they're doing. And then they're like, I want to start learning how to make knives. And then straight away, I want to get into making knives full time as a business versus how back then in the olden days, it was understood that you had to have a job, and knife making was kind of like a side hustle.
Yeah. And honestly, back then, like, you tell somebody you're a knife maker, you were kind of looked at as a bit of a weirdo.
Sure. You're like,
you make
why
knives.
Are you making knives?
Yeah.
You plan on killing somebody?
Is there a market for knives? Like, and there was obviously knife shows happening back then, the Atlanta Blade Show and Eugene Show and stuff. But, and again, there were some full-time knife makers, but nobody was getting rich at it. That's for sure.
Sure.
And, and there was a few famous, kind of quote unquote famous knife makers back then. But I really think that really started to change, like, over about a 5 to 10 year period. We went from like the mid 90s to like the early 2000s. And all of a sudden you were seeing a lot more people like, wow, that guy went out full time on making knives and he's actually surviving. Like, he's making it. And you saw guys like Harvey Dean or Tim Hancock and Larry Fagan and, JD Smith. Of course, JD, I think he was a professor, right?
Yeah, he was
teaching. Hank Nickmeyer, but Hank Nickmeyer was also a professor of art. But there were guys, like, more and more people making it. And I think really when I graduated high school in 99, I still kind of plan on taking over my parents' business. But in that next year or two, like, the knife making was just pulling me, like, I have to try this full time.
Sure.
And it's like, I know that all these old knife makers are telling me, don't do it. Like, even the guys that were full time, they're like, get a good job and make knives on the side. Like, keep knives fun. And of course, being young, I'm like, yeah, well, I can do it. They're just not running their business right. I know better than them. Yeah. And so, so I went full time in like 2002. I quit my.
That's the year I graduated high school.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, you are a pup. I actually closed on my first house, and the next day I quit my job.
Wow.
Yeah, because I had to have show an actual steady income to get a home loan.
Right, to get the loan.
Yeah, and then quit when we closed. So
right.
Yeah, and honestly, it's really interesting because back then, there was no internet really. Like, there was, but there wasn't. No one was really using it super properly. I remember Daniel O'Malley coming to some hammer-ins in the late 90s.
Okay.
And like had this idea of, I'm going to build this website and be a knife dealer, And I remember him being at Shane Taylor's with this computer. And like, I remember guys like him and a couple other guys like building guys some websites.
Yeah.
In the early 2000s, 2000, 2002, 4, right in there. Guys actually had their own websites. Social media obviously wasn't a thing yet.
Sure.
And then
forums were the social
media. Yep.
Of the time. And they're actual social media where people were actually interacting and socializing with each other.
Yep. And there was
necessarily always positive.
Not always positive. That was the thing. Like, and there were a couple forums that were better than others. Some of them were just total dumpster fires. But yeah, it is interesting. It was an interesting transition. So when I quit making knives full time in 2010, I was actually probably one of the better ones in the country about like collecting email addresses. Sure. I had like a constant contact email list. If I didn't sell a knife at a show, I could come home, blast out an email to 3,000 people and sell it like instantly. And that was really working well. Facebook and some of that was like just really becoming a thing, but it was still, some of us were kind of dummies and didn't realize the power of it at the time.
Sure.
It was like a place you showed pictures of your kids.
Right.
It wasn't this marketing tool right then. I think had I kept making knives full time through that like recession time, I definitely would have been one of those that probably would have capitalized on that well early. Sure. But that's when I kind of dropped out for a little while. I got a divorce, my house burnt down, dog run away, all the country music stuff. So that was kind of a wild, kind of crazy time. And quite honestly, I went through about a 5-year stretch where I was just kind of hanging on to life by the tail. And, knife making was something I was doing a little bit on the side, but honestly I had 4 young kids and I was kind of single dad in it. And things were crazy, but yeah, it's been an interesting, and then to see, and you and I were just talking about it this morning or last night, it's been wild for me. Like when I used to go to the Blade Show every single year, or New York or Oregon, you had to go to knife shows to be known.
Right.
And you had to be in like Blade magazine.
If you were a serious maker, and people were meant to take you serious, you had to go to the shows.
Yes. If you wanted to be on a national scale, there were definitely guys who were more of, I'd say, a regional knife maker or local knife maker, maybe do some local gun shows. But if you wanted to be on a national scale, nationally recognized, going to the Blade Show, winning an award at a Blade or Knife Makers Guild or, Eugene, Oregon, like there were shows that were out there that would definitely get your name out there. And they were kind of also automatic. Like if you win this award, then you're going to be in Blade magazine. And being in Blade or being in Knives Illustrated back then was a kind of a big deal.
Right.
And so, but it's super interesting that the guys that in like 2008 that were what I'd consider like famous in the knife world and like the pillars of the knife world. What are we? 12 years later, or 14 years later, are almost unknown if they're not on social media.
Sure.
I talk to new knife makers all the time. They have no idea who a Don Fogg is or a Larry Fagan,
right?
Or a Tim Hancock. Tim would have absolutely been on the whole social media thing, but unfortunately he had gotten Parkinson's and passed away from it. But Tim was a very progressive guy. He would have embraced all that stuff.
Cool.
But there's guys that had huge backlogs, order lists in the AKI show. They didn't need to basically deal with that stuff. And they're maybe 50, 60 years old.
Right.
And they're like, screw that social media stuff. And it's amazing how now, if you're a brand new maker and you walk into the knife world today and you find it, say, through Forged and Fire on TV,
right,
and then you start looking up on Instagram and Facebook, you don't even know that there were these masters that came before.
Right.
That were just only 10 years ago were the biggest names in the game. And now because they have 112 followers on their Instagram page, they don't post on, they're like, oh, that must not be anybody.
Right. Yeah. And follower counts don't necessarily reflect quality of work.
Right.
It's whether it's kind of more of how how good people are at promoting themselves and their work.
And not to begrudge that, like there's a talent and an art form to the whole social media thing. There's guys like, I'm okay at it. There's guys that are amazing at it. And then there's guys that are just not good at it. But one thing that I find that holds true today that was the same way back in like 1995 is if you paid for good photography, you would end up usually getting good results out of that. Like if you paid Eric Agley or Coop or Jim Wire $100 for a photo in 1995 or 2000, it was probably going to be in a Blade magazine article. It was probably going to be in the Knives annual books. And same thing today. If you do a good job with photography and post those pictures, you're going to do better than the guy that's taking kind of shitty photos. That's like the one constant. Like people are visual, even back then. See a picture in a magazine, you're like, oh my God, look at that knife. You know. Yeah, it's weird. It's just been a changing world.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, that's the biggest thing. Like, I mean, just the platform has basically changed. Like, there were shows and there were forums, and then what social media has done is kind of basically brought those things. Actually, I remember when you were first getting into Instagram, and I was like, try to just treat it like the forums. Treat it like the forums. You post a picture of something that you did, you write a little caption about it. People engage with it and you engage with them. That's it.
I remember asking you about it.
Yeah. And I was like, it's basically the same thing. It's just changed a little bit. And so what social, like, especially like Instagram has brought together is kind of combined shows and forums. But it's also where there are literally millions of people like interacting on the platform. Right.
Yeah. And it's amazing because I remember being in high school and getting like, it was a big deal. I would get like a letter from England wanting a knife. Like they'd seen me in Blade.
Right.
And they wanted a knife. And it was crazy because, you know, you make a knife and then it would probably be, if you got a picture of that and they wanted to put it in a magazine, it would come out maybe 3 or 4 months later.
Right.
And then it would take it'd take 2 months to mail a letter to you and 2 months to go back and forth with each other and make a knife. And now, you know, again, I don't want to sound like the get off my lawn guy where it's like, you know, it was way better back then. Today's amazing. Like you have so many tools. It was so hard to get known back then. That today you can post up a picture and literally have thousands of people see it in a heartbeat and be able to like truly communicate, even like this, having your Patreon and being able to have people literally just communicate with the maker. Like, man, if you wanted to talk to Buster Warinsky back in the 90s, like you had to find him at a knife show and then you might get like 5 minutes with him.
Right.
Like, maybe you'd get lucky and find his phone number, or, you know, if you wanted to actually really communicate, that's where Don Fogg was such a groundbreaking guy. He started his Cup of Coffee knife page, and it was really like somewhat of like the beginning of the forums where you could go on to his, and he would have tips on heat treating and forging and grinding. And Don's page was like the single biggest resource of actual like non-bullshit information.
Yeah.
Because you'd go on the forums and who knows what dude's telling you what about heat treating. But if you read it on Don's page, it was legit.
Right.
Don was so groundbreaking with not only what he did with Damascus and knife making, but also like a guy that embraced technology and was way ahead. He had a computer before anybody.
I feel like when I was making this year's calendar, the Artisans of Steel calendar, the theme was like kind of pioneers and innovators of Damascus, and Don Fogg was definitely on that list. And I was looking around, and he doesn't even really have a website anymore. But thank goodness for. Have you ever heard of the Internet Archive or the Wayback Machine?
No.
So it's a thing you can basically take, and in the moment that day, like what a website looks like, you can kind of take a snapshot of it, and it like pulls all the information and it saves it to a server somewhere, and you can go back to Don's old website and navigate it and go through and see old articles and stuff like that.
That is super cool.
And it started in, it was like 93 or 94. Maybe that's too early. Maybe
Don's website?
Yeah.
I would say like
website.
95.
Okay.
I mean, that's my best guess. Cause I remember I passed my journeyman in 96, and I remember like getting on the computer about in that time frame, like reading heat treating stuff. And maybe he started at like 94, but like it really was becoming like a big thing, especially by like 99.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And even just like, he even just had pages on there that talked about, because he's a very deep thinking guy. So he really kind of went into, like, I think one of his pages was called The Way, and it was like about his philosophy of why we do this work and what he hopes to get out of it, and how it's a practice in learning the craft and also learning about yourself at the same time. And he has, I think by the time, I think it was, gosh, I feel like it was 2000, maybe around 2008 or something. When he kind of let the website lapse and stopped keeping it up, because I think it was just a lot for him at the time. And there was also a lot more happening around, with like the growing social media through Facebook, and a lot more people using different forums and stuff like that. And honestly, like, I wouldn't be surprised if even within his own forum, there was a lot of like bickering and infighting, and he's just like, I'm tired of this shit.
I honestly don't remember any of that on his particular forum, because he was so respected. I don't think anyone would even do it.
Right.
It was just I remember him just saying like, it's just too much of an undertaking of a task. Like, it's just got so big. You're right. Don was like an amazing combination of a philosopher, an artist, and a scientist. Like, he understood the science of like heat treating and steel and the actual technical stuff. But then he had like it was like the right brain, left brain, but he also had that whole like artistic side. And then he had that whole kind of philosophy. Like, when he would come to he would come to our hammer-ins in like 95, 96, 97, right in there in Montana at Rick Dunkerley's, and he would teach. And like, the technical stuff he was teaching was awesome, obviously, but he would just sit there and like talk about philosophy of his way of like knife making and just life. Like, he was a mentor to a lot of those knife makers back then. Amazing guy for sure.
So let's see, to kind of get back up to kind of more where we're at these days. So we competed together on Forged of Fire. I actually saw your first episode. You probably saw mine too. And so we both went into our episode together being runners up. And I actually, so I think I had somebody on set who was like telling me who was going to be on the show, and somebody else was supposed to be there.
Oh, so that's why I lost.
No.
Now I just figured it out.
It
just slipped up.
No,
it was a mole.
It was just a PA. It was our makeup gal. But Josh wasn't supposed to be there. There was some other maker, and I was like, okay, I feel pretty good about this. And then I saw Josh at the show, and I was like, oh fuck. God damn it. And it was fun. It was, that group of guys it was good. And I think it was good that we'd already all been on the show before once too. So there was a lot less, at least for me, there was a lot less nerves around it and stuff. And I think at one point when we're all like gluing our handles up in the second round, like, you're doing some sort of like, I think it was like 16 or 20 piece handle. And I did like, I kept it as simple as possible. So I think I'm the first one to finish gluing up. So I start walking around like, and with the camera, I'm like, oh, so what are you working on over here? Oh, what do you got going on? Wow, that's really intense. That's great though. That's going to look awesome. And it turned out looking killer, but It was a super fun experience, and we made it to the final round together, and it was on Valentine's Day actually.
Really?
I just remember, yeah, when we came back for the finals, we were there on Valentine's Day, and we went out to like some pasta joint that was a ridiculous pain in the ass to get to.
Yeah.
I remember we popped into a bar to just get some change.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't break change. We're like, what if we bought something? And they were still like, no.
No.
We know you want to use that money for the Subway. You can't have it.
Yeah.
It was ridiculous. It was the most absurd thing. But we got there and we hung out, and
guy, I remember in the final, I was like, I think it was after like the second round, I thought I had you. Like,
oh yeah, I was actually rewatching that because they have just like a clip on YouTube
yeah,
of like African weapons, and ours is the first one they show.
Oh, really?
Our episode. And I thought you had me too.
Yours had taken just a little bit of a like tweak on the.
Oh, and it just didn't cut the rope very well. And it's because it's an African weapon. I was like, oh, they're gonna cut through vegetation and stuff.
Yeah.
No, they did. What was it? The marine grade rope. What is it? Not sisal, but the hemp rope, I think.
Yeah, I don't remember, but they had a bunch of ropes strung back and forth. Yeah, and then you were kind of walking back like a little bit disappointed how that went, and I was like, yeah, well, don't like, it's not over yet. Like, depends on the next test. And then here's these giant freaking cow bones, and I had definitely cut my heat treating short with the Damascus I'd done on that thing. I had definitely like almost didn't get it heat treated because I also was doing.
You did a core bar. Did you do a fish mouth weld on that too?
Mm-hmm.
Holy shit!
Yeah, and I did. I was heat treating in salt. Mm-hmm. Well, that 6-inch tube of salt, 4 feet tall, took forever to melt.
Oh, really?
So I like it, and that's the stuff you don't see on the show. Like, they never show like a lot of that stuff. Yeah. But like, you know, to take cold salt and then heat it all the way to the critical temperature to do like thermal cycling and all that and change the temperature. Like, I would really, honestly, if you were building that sword in a regular deal, like that heat treating would have been like at least 1 full day of thermal cycling, and it was not. I didn't do well with that. And I saw those cow bones, and I was like, and my edge was pretty thin, and sure enough, chipped out chunks of it.
Yeah.
So, I definitely deserved second place on that one, but
it was fun though.
Yeah, it was fun. But like, gaining the friendship out of that and that experience and stuff was awesome. Because my first experience on there was a little more just contentious. It was this like not as like friendly.
Right.
And I'm like, I think being older helps. Like, I've accomplished what I've accomplished in the knife world. Like, Forged and Fired, I didn't feel like was going to like make my career or break it. Same way with you. Like, your talent speaks for itself, no matter what would have happened on that show. Like, that TV show isn't going to make or break your career.
Sure. And it's I mean, I think a lot of people still watch it and see it as a true reflection of real bladesmithing and knife making. And that is definitely not the case. I mean, ultimately, it is a game show.
Yeah.
Like,
and we've all seen some amazing makers like a JD Smith or somebody go on and, you know, quote unquote, fail early on in the process.
No.
And if you look at his body of work, you know, that's not like a reflection of a career.
Right.
So there's guys on there that both you and I could beat with our eyes closed, literally. And then, of course, then I go on that show and I have to go against you. And it's like, shit. Why couldn't I go against that guy who was on there last week?
Well, and I don't know if you knew anything about me.
No, I didn't.
Not that you should have.
No.
You should know who I am.
How dare you? No, I didn't know anything about you. But then once I did a little bit of research and looked at what you were made, I knew, like, going home, like, I had to. It's why I kind of went so far all out on the steel that I made, because like when I saw what you make, it's like, okay, there's definitely certain people that I would have gone home and taken it like way more careful.
Sure.
as far as like played it way safe and just bring a really good blade that could be basically indestructible.
Yeah.
But not so fancy.
Right.
Where like I brought that handle I brought was carved and like all this shit because
Right.
like I thought I had to do everything under the sun to beat you. The problem was I didn't spend the time I need to heat treating it,
Sure.
which with any knife, your heat treat is actually the most important thing above all else.
Right. Well,
so leave it to me to not do it, right?
Well, I'm glad that we had that experience because, yeah, I'm very thankful for our friendship.
Mm-hmm.
And outside of knife making, like you've just been a good friend, especially for the last couple of years, me struggling with some of like my custom order lists and stuff like that. It's been good to talk to you because you've been there and you've dealt with that and you've been through that, and as well as other like you mentioned before, just like your house catching fire and all that other hardships. And so it's been good to just have you as a friend as a result of doing that silly show.
No, I feel the same way. And what you realize in this whole thing is like there's very few people that are full-time knife makers that found like any part of that path easy.
Sure.
Like, and there's struggles and like I've definitely learned my own lessons from my own stupid mistakes or getting myself in binds or whatever, or just hearing lots of other stories from other people. And man, the custom order thing can be really tough too, because like I remember getting a lot of advice about that when I was younger, because I got a huge backlog of orders when I was in high school.
Oh wow.
And then I had knife makers telling me like you should not be tying yourself down with those orders when you don't have any responsibilities in life, like that you have to be paying bills. Like you should be just doing stuff that tries to make you a better knife maker. Mm-hmm. But when you're 16-year-old kid and it's like, yeah, but I could make this knife and get $400. I want $400. And it's like, actually it'll do better for you to not make that and try something new and like build out your resume and your craft and and I actually really do wish like if I could go back and do anything different, it would have been for all of those first numbers of years to just do every single thing I would have made back then would have been like something new and like pushing the limit versus I made a lot of knives over and over again just because I had orders for them.
Sure.
And I look back now, I'm like, none of that money mattered really. It would have been really cool to try. And I probably had too much of a closed mind to some other certain types of knives, whether it's, production knives or other styles of folding knives or guys, you kind of tend to like really only dive down the rabbit hole of the hole you're in, So if you're learning from a knife maker who's just forging and doing this, then you kind of learn from them and their friends. And there's like, there's other worlds that like now I find more interesting, and it's fun. It's fun to jump back and forth between worlds.
Sure.
And I think it makes you a better overall maker.
Yeah. I mean, you've done stuff like travel halfway around the world at the drop of a hat for projects, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That was a crazy project, but I did a sword for a sheikh in Abu Dhabi, but he flew me to like go look at the Wallace collection in London, which is rad to go see the Arms and Armor collection in that museum. Yeah. And then he flew me to Istanbul, Turkey to go to the Topkapi Palace and look at a sword in the museum there. That's the cool thing about knife making. Like I grew up in a little tiny logging town in Montana, and very few people ever got to like leave or get out of that town. And here I was a little kid going to knife shows in Atlanta and New York City and, went to a knife show in Paris, and like knife making really got me like around the world, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's surprising. And I'm only starting like in the last year, or actually really this year, I'll be doing a lot of traveling, and it's all for knife making, or because of knife making and what I've been able to figure out and how I've been able to help people. It's, especially around Damascus making and stuff like that. it's people all of a sudden, like, I feel like there used to be this old, and you could probably speak better to this, but like this old frame of mind that was like, you got to keep everything secret. Don Fogg obviously didn't have that philosophy really. But more and more people are sharing. And I think they're also finding that because they're sharing, people are seeing them as a resource, and then they're wanting them to come to wherever they're at, whether it's in South Africa. Like Steve Schwarzer has been all over the place lately. Yep. He's been in South Africa. He's over in Colorado. He's from Florida. I'm sure he's one of those guys that has probably an open invitation wherever he wants to go teach and share what he's working on. And it's because of how helpful he's been.
Yeah. So Steve, Don Fogg, excuse me, Hank Nickmeyer.
Hank, I would love to meet. I've never met Hank.
Yeah.
I've heard lots of good things.
He passed away. So you're not meeting him. I mean, if you meet him.
I missed my fucking opportunity.
Yeah.
Take your opportunities when you got them.
Yeah, seriously.
I could have met him a few years ago, and I passed up on it. I just didn't have I couldn't swing it.
But those guys, so the whole keeping things in thing, like that's not something I really experienced at all back in the 90s and 2000s. Okay. Now, there were a few people like that for sure, but there's always going to be some people like that.
Sure.
But, you know, I always tell people the only reason I got as good as I did so fast and so young is because people shared. Like, I wasn't some savant that just figured this shit out on my own. Like, anything I know, I was probably taught. Like, I'm not really a super genius. So, I will say the sharing of information is what made the 90s and the early 2000s special, because there were hammer-ins all the time that we were getting together. Devin Thomas, Ed Shemp, Bob Kramer, you know, and then the older guy, you know, there's like that era of guys, say Rick Dunkerley, you know, Shane Taylor, Wade Coulter. There was all those guys, but the guys that they all kind of looked up to and mentored under were Don Fogg, Daryl Meyer, Steve Schwarzer, Al Pendre, you know, people like that were all older. And all of those guys were super sharing. And it really bred, like, I think it's just this family tree of sharing that passed down. And so many guys like of my age, but maybe more of like your years of knife making and stuff, guys have benefited from all that don't even necessarily know that they have. Like, there's all these guys down here in the bottom of this that really the things they learned from different people kind of really funnels up to about 6 guys.
Right.
You know, in the 90s, it was about 6 people.
So it's more like the base of a tree.
Yeah.
Like you have a solid trunk and then the branches out.
Yes.
So all of us owe so much to that foundation, that trunk, that base trunk, and those roots of that tree.
Yeah. And when I did my little podcast with Don Fogg, one thing that really struck me is he said it's really extremely rare in this society, in this world, that you can ever go back and talk to the people that were at the beginning of something.
Right.
And Don was literally at the beginning with, you know, Jim Schmidt, you know, Daryl Meyer and some of those guys. Howard Clark came along a little bit later, but like was instrumental in all the heat treating stuff. But there really is, like, you know, and then you also got to say guys like Bill Moran that started the American Bladesmith Society.
Sure.
And that was more like blade forging, really less Damascus.
Okay.
But when I talk about Schwarzer, Fogg, Daryl Meyer, Hugh Bartrung is a name that a lot of people don't know. He was one of the first people using powder. You know, I remember, gosh, in probably the year 2000 or a little bit before, Hugh gave me a tile that said "In God We Trust" in the Damascus.
Oh wow!
You know, and he had forged that in with powder. So there were some guys back then, but it all leads from like those first 5 or 6 guys, and then it went to like a dozen to 2 dozen, and now is blown up into this giant knife world that, you know, like Don Fogg coming up with W's, you know, how many people are making W's Damascus, and they're making all these different patterns that you call something, and they all comes out of W's.
Well, and that's exactly why I wanted to have him in my calendar this year, is because W's has become such a foundational element and process for so many patterns. In fact, many of the patterns that are also in the calendar, their patterns are based off of Don Fogg's W's. It's just they added something else that added a twist to it. That was the base element, and then they did it something else that made it even more interesting. And yeah.
And Don would be super proud of like places like people like you have taken the Damascus stuff, because like there was a bunch of us doing a lot of really cool stuff in the early 2000s, but then it really like, I'd say in the last 10 years, like a bunch of you guys, I don't even want to name names because I know I'll leave some guys out, but I can think like when I look through on Instagram, I see, 6 to 10 guys that I think are doing just crazy shit. Sure. And guys like Don's so smart, he probably can reverse engineer a lot of that stuff, but like a Devin Thomas. Yeah. But you're right. It all really does stem from like that one pattern W's is just so responsible for so much stuff, so many patterns.
Well, and I feel like it was either in my conversation with him because I had a few email exchanges with him, or it was your conversation with him when I was listening to your podcast, that he admits like the W's were created from a mistake of losing track of orientation of his billet. Yeah. And he lost track of the orientation, like if the lines were going this way or if they're going this way or whatever way they were going. And he was kind of like, fuck it, and smashed it down. And they ended up being vertical, but when you crush them vertical, they kind of start to cup and they upset and squish out like that. And that's what happened. He's like, well, let's just go with it. And then he stacked them back up. And I think maybe he laddered them the first time or twisted them. And it looked really cool and very unusual and unique especially for this. And even still, honestly, the patterns are very, very cool.
Yeah. And what's amazing with those W's is it doesn't matter what you do to them. Mm-hmm. It's cool. Yeah. Like, it's just like, there's almost nothing you can do with W's that doesn't just look neat. Yeah. And then you start mixing in all the geometric stuff with the mosaics. Yeah. And it's just kind of endless. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually the knife that I included of his, I think it does have some W's around the outer edge. Yeah, it's the bottom one. It's a dagger of his. It's that dagger.
That dagger right there. Yeah.
It's a dagger. He'll pull it up real quick. Might be towards the end, I think. And it has jelly rolls through the middle, but they're tiled. And this is an old knife. Like this is probably one of the earliest of modern times of tiled mosaics being used. Yeah. And that is one reason. And obviously he does all this crazy carving work and
multi-bar, and also the fact that he did the fish mouth.
He did the fish mouth
forging, and the fact that like the bars are perfectly even. Yeah. And then like you said, all the carving and texture, and that's the part we were talking about. JD Smith, JD Smith was a guy that would come to the Eugene, Oregon show, and there were a lot of guys that would have a knife similar to this from a standpoint of like a shape, but they wouldn't have done like this carving back here, or even just this texturing on these spacers and stuff, right. Just a little bit of like stippling, texturing. Yeah. There's just so much like the fire forged kind of textured look and stuff. Like,
here, I'll hold it up for the video real quick.
Yeah.
Let's see. Get it in here. So there's the texture along here, and then also on the guard, and there's also, it looks like a gold or inlay of some sort. And then you can see the jelly rolls through the core of the bar. And then I think that's laddered W's. So somehow he also, not only did he tile through the middle, but he also laddered the edge bar to reveal the W's activity.
Yep. Yep. No, he's amazing. That's for sure.
He's a talent that so many of us owe massive thanks to for laying, like you said, like that groundwork that so much of us rely on for being able to sell our work and make it look extremely ornate and unique and interesting looking that draws in potential customers.
What's amazing is how kind of technologically advanced he got with some of that. And then by the end of his career, he had reverted back and sold all of his power tools, all his equipment, and was hand scraping, hand making every sword or knife that he was doing at the end with no belt grinders.
Interesting.
Like he kind of went the opposite direction of like the last few years of his career were like back to the basics of the craft, like Japanese style stuff. Like it's just a very interesting human.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting to kind of go back to what we talked about earlier about how you get to a certain skill level that you start to recognize and understand really just how much you don't know. And I wonder if, and that's obviously a better question for him to answer, but I wonder if he got to a point where he's like, I really want to understand the skills that people were using hundreds of years ago, because you walk through the Met, Arms and Armory, and you see stuff that was made like 1,000 years ago, and it just completely boggles the mind because they're working with so few tools and so much incredible skill. And I think that's where real, like, true refinement and mastery comes from, is like, what can you actually do with the fewest? Like, it's great for productivity to have all the machines, but I think for one's personal, like, desire to become a true master in this craft is trying to figure out how to pare it down and still get that same high level quality work done with as little as possible.
Yeah. And when you say the Metropolitan Museum in New York, I remember guys talking about it. And of course, like any knife maker, especially back then, being full-time and going to shows, I was broke. So I couldn't afford the extra hotel room night in New York. So one year I took a red eye to New York so I could arrive early in the morning. And then I spent the whole, like, Thursday before the knife show that I would have been flying.
Yeah.
I spent that whole day at that Metropolitan Museum in the Arms and Armor. And it's same thing with like the Wallace collection in London that we talk about. And there's a lot of other Arms and Armor museums around the world. Like, if you're a knife maker, and I remember having this, I remember being younger and being like, yeah, that doesn't really pertain to what I'm doing. Like, that's cool. They did stuff back then. When I went to the Met, it's like that all changed. Like, you walk in there and it slaps you in the face so hard of like, there is nobody on the planet today doing stuff like that. And we have freaking electricity and power grinders and equipment and belts and rotary air tools and like everything under the sun. And nobody's even doing anything remotely close to some of how ornate some of that stuff is. And the amount of gold, I mean, if you tried to make some of that stuff today, it would be multi-million dollar pieces. And you think, like, was it generations that worked on some of that stuff? Like, it's just incredible if I could ever time travel, it'd be amazing to go back and like see all that. I'm not a super religious person, but like when I die, I actually hope you can go back and finally like get all the answers to your questions.
I think you can.
Be amazing.
That's my belief.
It's a good one to have. I hope so.
Okay. You've kind of you've been a bridge between, like we've talked about, like Don Fogg and Steve Schwarzer, and even like some of the kind of like what maybe would be considered like the second generation or third generation with Rick Dunkerley and those guys and Wade Coulter, to also being, you know, highly successful now in today's day with MKC. Can you talk about what you got going on with MKC and how that, I mean, you kind of touched on it just a little bit earlier, but just like where the dream of MKC came from, some of the unforeseen struggles maybe you could touch on, and like where you hope for it to go.
Yeah. When I was a full-time lineman, I mean, it is being a full-time knife maker, doing it the way like Mareko's doing it and others, you know, I have huge respect for that because I did that for years. And you really do have to love the craft, and you have to really change somewhat of your expectations or goals in life of what you can maybe achieve financially and like things you can buy. And it really is a trade-off in living that life. Harvey Dean and I have talked about this for hours and hours. Like Harvey said, like when he quit doing steel work as a full-time steel worker and became a knife maker, you kind of just know that you're going to replace maybe some things in life that money can buy you with experiences that money can't buy you.
I like that. I've never heard that, but I like that.
The idea of the fact that you might go to Australia and teach next year, the fact that you're going to go to Anchorage and teach, and the fact that you can go to Hawaii and work with Neil Kamamura, and like things that people that have full-time day jobs can't either afford the time to do. They can afford the money, but they can't afford maybe the time, or do they have maybe the skill set or someone doesn't have the desire to then fly that person somewhere to have them teach. So you're replacing, like I say, kind of the money aspect with experiences. For me personally, I wanted to have a little bit of both, but I also really what MKC was mostly about was when I grew up hunting and fishing, and when I'd go into stores, I just see like so many of these like just shit knives. Like I felt like a lot of the factories, the knife factory people, and even a lot of the hunters, they were buying some of the very best gear that they could buy, optics and $500 freaking jackets and shit. And then they'd spend like $29 on a knife.
Right.
And like
spend all this money on all this other gear, but I don't want to spend more than 20 or 30 bucks. On
$3,000 on a spotting scope, even though they hunt in the trees. Like you don't need a spotting scope. You hunt in timber. There's so much to that. But then like I say, they just would buy the shittiest knives. And I didn't feel like a lot of guys were valuing or even knew how nice a good knife could be to use. And I think it's very similar to the standpoint of in the kitchen and in the chef knife world, where you can go buy piece of shit chef's knives all you want and use them in the kitchen. And a lot of people just don't know how nice it is to use like a high quality chef's knife. And I think the hunting world and the chef's knife world is very similar in that standpoint. And I think it's very kind of difficult to go buy like a high quality chef's knife. And just like in the chef's knife world, if you ask a custom knife maker to make you a really high quality hunting knife, it's probably going to be $800 or $1,000. Well, you don't want to buy that and give it to your kid to go lose, or, even as a person with a regular job, like that's a lot of money to spend on a knife.
Right.
And I felt like there was a gap in the hunting world that could be filled with, I think we could build knives that were as close to custom as possible, that would give you that quality. But at a more affordable price. But that being said, I was never ever trying to run to the bottom of the price barrel either. You do have to spend some money for some quality and for being American made. And I remember one knife maker in particular that told me that like you can't compete against China. Like it's impossible. Like what you're trying to do is not possible in the US. And I just felt like we're living in a time where Americans will support American made product. And so, we're floating in that price range of $225 to $350. It's not cheap. That's a significant amount of money that somebody's, on a budget with kids, but it's attainable. Like if you hold value in that, it's attainable. And it also, I think, means that they will actually value that knife and pass it down. It really bothered me. There was this new fad of these replaceable blade throwaway knives. And that drives me freaking crazy because I always like to say there's very few things in this world that are passed down anymore. Back when our grandparents were young, their furniture was passed down. Like it just seemed like there was so much quality back then. And now there's one thing that's never really changed is knives, guns, artwork, and jewelry. Like those are basically the four things that get passed down. Maybe occasionally a custom piece of furniture, or maybe occasionally, a car or something like that that's special. But if you walk into Target, I dare you to try to find something in there that's not made to throw away.
Right.
It's all made to throw away. And I don't know how many times I've had, and every knife maker's had, people come in their shop and ask them to sharpen a knife that was their grandpa's. It's an old buck knife or a case knife or whatever. It doesn't have to be a custom high-end knife, but it was the fact that it was their grandparents' knife. Yeah. And a lot of people were throwing knives away because they couldn't sharpen them. You know, and they didn't want to deal with the maintenance. And I really feel like a lot of that was the fact that the knives weren't being made properly to begin with proper steel and heat treat and edge geometry is key. Same with the chef's knife. Yeah. If you have a blade that's way too thick and somebody tries to sharpen it, they're going to really struggle. Sure. Especially with some of these new Razoo stainless steels that are harder than hell. Yeah. And I wanted to be able to provide, it really bothered me when people would ask me when I was a full-time maker and I'm making $5,000 knives and someone asked me to make a honey knife and I'd either say no, like I'm too busy, which would disappoint them. Or I would say like, yeah, but now I've got this moral dilemma, right? Like I really need $1,000 for that knife to be worth my time, but it's local guy that's making $20 an hour and got kids and like, right. I know he can't afford $1,000. So now am I going to tell him, am I going to make that for less or tell him a price I know he can't afford? Now he's embarrassed. And I just felt like there was room to be somewhere in the middle of these cheap piece of shit knives and like high-end custom. Mm-hmm. And honestly, it's kind of exploded. It's done really well. And people are like sending us DMs every single day of their knives being used in the field and they're giving them away. And I, I think they still feel like they're really special. Yeah. You know, they're not a custom knife, but they're, you know, as close as you can get and still be a production. And I also think they resonate with the people behind them, whether it's me or my employees or whatever that are making them. They still know their maker, right? Even though they are somewhat production. They're not maybe envisioning just robots. Sure. And machines stamping them out.
Yeah, somebody was saying the other day that Leatherman, one of the things they write on like part of their advertising or marketing is that the buttons that are pushed to run the machines are pushed by a human hand.
Yeah, like, that's not custom.
Cool.
Yeah, no, and so I think that's, you know, and really we're getting ready to kind of push some of this out and announce this stuff. But I also, like, being a knife maker doesn't necessarily mean I know everything about every kind of knife. So like we brought Morocco on to design our culinary stuff as we come out with that. Because I do want our company to have legitimacy in whatever we do. Mm-hmm. I know the hunting world, I don't really need much help in designing hunting knives, but in the culinary stuff, you know, having your expertise, and track record and really a respect for it would be, I feel like, disrespectful for me to be able to say like, here's a chef's knife and I don't need help with that. Like Montana Knife Company, I'm Josh Smith and I know it all, right? Like I would rather bring in people where I need it, that I respect, that have reached, like, to me, the highest levels of that craft, and get help in designing stuff that if a chef picks it up, they're like, wow, somebody designed this that knew what they were talking about. Sure. I could make a chef for probably 80% of people, make a chef's knife that 80% of people would probably think like, oh, this is fine. But my concern is I want the highest user of those knives, the highest skilled users, to respect it. Sure. And if that's the case, then everybody under them that's just the regular backyard barbecue guy will be like, I don't know what it is about this knife, but it's better. Yeah. Something's better.
Yeah. I've always, people ask, you know, what tools or what skills are the things that help you make the you know, great chef's knives? And I'm like, it's not the skills or the tools, it's my knowledge of that tool. And I could say this. So I guess to finish that thought is what I think helps my chef's knife stand apart is actually my knowledge of, yes, the skills and knowledge of how to make that tool well, but also my experience with that tool, in cooking in restaurants and cooking at home all the time, is what really helps inform the way I design and make my chef's knives. And I could do the same, just like you were saying about chef's knives, I could do the same thing. I could probably make a pretty decent hunting knife. But the reality is I've never hunted. I've never gone hunting. I've never had to skin an animal, break an animal down, and pack it back out. And so while I could probably make a decent tool, I could never stand behind it 100% and say, this is probably the best hunting knife you've ever used.
Backed by experience.
Yeah. No, backed by experience, I think, is what makes a huge difference. And
somebody asked on our Instagram, I answered a question last night, and they said something about how long does it take to make that knife? And I said, it took 30 years. Like, it took 30 years to get to the point. Like, I'm pretty damn fast. If I make a custom knife now, depending on what it is, like, like the sword I made on Forged in Fire, the sword you made.
Yeah.
Those swords, though they weren't perfect because of time constraints and whatever, and obviously my heat treat.
Mine was perfect.
My heat treat, I know, it's why you won. But like, obviously my heat treat time got short on that. However, what I was able to crank out in 5 days, there's very few knife makers in the world that can do that.
Yeah, no.
And same thing with yours, like the level that we took those swords to. So does that mean that sword, if I make that same sword at home and sell it, should that sword be less money? Because it only took me, say it took me 60 hours to make it. And it takes the next guy that's less experienced 260. Well, does that mean you should get less money for it? To me, it's more, that's where pricing gets weird with stuff, is you have to figure in, just because you get better at something and you do it faster doesn't mean your work should go down in value. Yeah, in price.
People aren't paying for time, they're paying for skill.
Exactly. And that's where, hopefully as we grow as a production company, and I really feel like I can kind of speaking for you, but I think it's probably true. Our chef's knives that we hope to produce here will maybe provide even some of your own customers, or I would say not necessarily some of your own customers, but more of your own fans that just literally can't afford one of your custom knives and never will be able to. Maybe they're a school teacher on a budget, and quite frankly, I feel like I'm a normal person as well, still living on a budget, right? And you're a normal person. Like, we understand when people can't afford $5,000 for a knife.
Yeah.
Now we're very appreciative that there are people out there that can, and that have like the appreciation for the craft and that art form. But we also know there's normal people that would really like to spend $300 to $500 on a chef's knife. Yeah. And that's still a lot of money for them.
Right.
And it's still very special. But I think they also understand that you just can't make those chef's knives in that price range and make a living.
Yeah.
And so hopefully our company will be somewhat of that in between of, they're still special to those people. And they're still getting quality. But they also understand it's still not one of Mareco's. Like, it's still not quite to that level.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think we were kind of talking about this earlier this morning, but I think, especially when it comes to the things we have in our lives, I think the goal should be to acquire things, not just to have things, but because they serve a purpose and that they can serve their purpose for a long period of time. And so kind of transitioning to this philosophy of reverence around the things that we have, instead of living in being taken up in this consumer driven world where, you go to Target and basically nothing there is designed to last forever. Even though a knife might cost $350 or even $500, it's designed to also for you to get that value out of it. Because realistically, if you, like, somebody gets one of the MKC chef's knives and they have it until the day they die, whether that's 20 years down the road or 30 years or 50 years, whatever, that's a long time to amortize $500 across. It's like, that's to fractions of a penny a day for quality equipment, and then it's something that then can be passed down.
And there were guys that were like, yeah, I just can't afford $500 for a hunting knife or whatever, or $300 for a hunting knife. But then they'll literally buy a $110 new hunting knife every hunting season.
Right.
And it's like,
and they've been doing it for the last 7 or 8 years.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, why don't you buy one good one? And then there is some of that. And Marco had a good point this morning. We should have just had the podcast running while we were eating breakfast. But that sometimes people look at like some of the care portion of owning a knife as a detriment. Like, well, I don't want that carbon steel because you gotta care for it. Well, yeah, you spent freaking $500 on it or $1,000 on it. Like, the care part is actually what is some of the like cool part of it. Of like, I have like what you compared to with cast iron pans. Like, a lot of people like take the time to heat up their pan and oil it up and like don't wash that with dish soap. Just wipe it out and put it away. And same thing with a carbon steel knife. Like, whether it's a hunting knife and I tell people, if your hunting knife looks used and looks patinaed down the road, to me, that's more of a badge of honor of like,
sure,
that's seen a lot of use in the field, or that chef's knife's seen a lot of use in the kitchen. To me, that's like character that's built up over time. When you see an old man or an old woman or an old couple that's all wrinkly, and you can just kind of tell, like, sometimes like those people have seen hell. Like, they've lived through some hell. Like, I looked at my grandma who lived through the Great Depression, and like scars and some gray hair and some wrinkles mean that person has seen some shit.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same way for a knife. And what's cool about with our company is you can send those knives back in and as many times as you want, but say in 10 years, like, that thing's really getting worn down, send it in and we'll regrind it and shape it up for you and put a new edge on it and send it back to you, and you'll get another 10 years out of it. Yeah. And eventually it will be worn out and you'll get a new one. But I have some worn out knives of my great grandfathers that owned a butcher shop, and you look at it and literally like half the blade's gone.
Sure.
Like, that blade was sharpened forever.
Right.
And still nobody threw it away.
Right.
Like, a couple generations of people have like, nope, this was great grandpa's, and they kept passing it on, which I think is cool.
Yeah.
When my mom's gone someday, guarantee like all her old chef's knives will remain in our house forever.
Yeah.
She has a huge cast iron pan collection.
Oh, wow.
Every single size, like everything.
From a little single egg
Yep.
to like a big.
Seriously. And they're all hanging in her house. I should have her
Right.
send us a picture today and show you. You'd like it. But that's that kind of stuff. That those cast iron pans were, when she was just had gotten married, there was an old black man that she kind of knew that didn't have much for family, and he had this huge collection of pans, and she liked to cook.
Yeah.
And so he gave her that collection because he knew that she would appreciate them. And
Right.
50 years later, she's still cooking with them.
Wow. Yeah.
Kind of cool.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Hell yeah, man. Well, I think MKC, what you got going on with the MKC is really freaking cool. We actually got some questions for you from the people. This is part of the benefit of being part of the Patreon, peeps. You get to ask direct questions of Mr. Josh Smith, as long as I can get the app to work.
This isn't a Patreon where like they get to see my feet or anything, is it?
I mean, they might ask for feet pictures.
Whatever they ask for, they get.
Not exactly. Sorry, my app is not playing nicely. And so I'm going to go to the website. This is frustrating. Sorry. Stay with me. What kind of drops do you have coming up for MKC?
This Thursday, we have the Blackfoot drop coming up. Blackfoot was our first knife that we kind of launched with, so it kind of has a special place in my heart.
Sure.
Kind of all around little hunting knife, about a 3 3/4 inch blade. Kind of a cool little knife. Our stuff, you're going to notice our stuff is pretty simple, not a lot of bells and whistles. They're just made to work. Don't go too crazy. So
yeah. All right. I found it. We got one Who else is in here actually? Who's watching right now? I'd be curious to know. I love knowing who's watching because I can't really see the names, but when you jump in, maybe it's House Bear Forge. But anyways, all right, we got a question from Mr. Brian Hennenkamp. He's the guy that's up in Renton, Washington. He is Tortuga Blade Works. He says, congratulations on the success of MKC. It's been exciting to watch and support by jumping in on those drops. Before you officially left your previous career and went full-time in bladesmithing, what was your strategy on balancing work, family, doing custom orders, and still finding time to grow and make the things you want to make?
That's a good question. What's up, House Bear? Steven? The answer to that would probably be sleep when you're dead.
Got you. Sure.
That is a very hard, it almost seems like you get differing advice from different people, right? Like the knife makers that are full-time are telling the young guys like, man, this is a tough way to go. Like, go get a job with benefits and a 401k and make knives when you want, because you can make kind of whatever you want. And then the guy that's doing that, like I've lived both lives, where I was working. It sounds like you have a lot of time, right? You're working 8 to 4:30. So, I'll get off work at 4:30. I'm home by 5. Like I have 5 hours to work in my shop every single night. Mm-hmm. And then you realize you have 4 kids in their own sports and they all need fed.
Yeah.
And,
you got to feed kids?
Yeah.
That's weird.
So it definitely is a challenge where I always found that, if you can force yourself to get up, to me, the early mornings were always the most productive. Like kids aren't bothering you, friends aren't bothering you. You don't have honeydews. That time from 5 in the morning until 7 or 8 in the morning before you got to go to work. You can really just leave the phone inside and just work for like 3 hours a day. It's 15 hours a week, plus a little bit of time on the weekends. Like it's amazing how many times I'd go out to my shop feeling like this is barely worth going out here. And then like 2 hours later, like, holy shit, I just accomplished a lot.
Sure.
That happened a lot. And that 2 hours adds up. I mean, think about if you sit down to hand sand a blade for 2 hours, like you might get that entire blade done, hand sanded, ready to etch.
Yeah.
Think about now the next day, that blade's all etched, right? 2 more hours of work. Well, you fit a guard on it. Your handle's probably drilled up and fit up, and you might even have the handle glued on it. Mm-hmm. Well, the next day, 2 more hours. Well, shit, you can probably grind that whole handle down, do all your shaping, and be ready to sand it, or maybe it's half sanded. So 5 days later, that knife's almost done.
Sure.
In just 5 days. So, but yeah, it's a tough balance. And I really do think it's important to find that balance. I think when you do find a really, really good wife, you should try to keep her. And so,
right. What is it? Behind every good knife maker, or in front of every good knife maker, is a woman with a real job.
With a real job. Yeah. Sugar mama. I do think that's also something that's, man, if you're dating or whatever, like having a wife that's also understanding of the time that needs to be spent. I almost felt sometimes like it is a little bit of a selfish thing. Like you're chasing your own dream.
Sure.
And hopefully your spouse can see and understand that dream can very likely that down the road become beneficial for the entire family. But when you're learning, it's really kind of all just about you.
Yeah.
And it's just your hobby.
Right.
And, I tell people, like, if you looked at it in the reverse, and if your wife said, I need to go out to our little shop every single night for 5 hours and sew, and you need to watch the kids, like, well, that sucks. Like, why are you going out to sew? Like, why do you hang out with me? Or so you definitely have to be understanding of both sides of that and try to carve out and make sure you make some time. And I definitely failed at that. I ended up divorced. So, but that being said, I really feel like my wife now, Jess, is also the absolute single reason why I was able to do what I was able to do. Because with her, I actually had the support.
Yeah.
And not only support, but like pushing me, like, you should quit your job.
Right.
We can make it work. Like, you should do this. Like, you should get after it. Like,
Wow.
do you need to go to your shop tonight? Do you need to work? Like, but I think she saw the potential.
Sure.
So it's kind of a long answer, but
no, it's good. I think going back to finding that time, I've read a lot of books about productivity in the last couple of years, just trying to figure my own stuff out and trying to figure out how to optimize my own time in the shop. And a lot of books say whether you say you give somebody a specific task, like maybe it's hand sanding, whether you give them 4 hours or 2 hours, they could take that one task and they can get it done in that 4 hours. But if you tell them they only got 2 hours, they'll still get it done in those 2 hours. And so it actually forces you to be productive. And I think that is actually a good way. Like, honestly, like a lot of people, I think a lot of people could benefit from kind of actually restricting their time in a way. And they could get more out of their life rather than, because I don't think productivity is not a result of a lot of hours in the shop. It's a result of being productive.
Effective hours.
Effective hours. Productivity is a result of actually being productive. It doesn't matter how much time it is. So it's like, maybe it's only a couple hours, maybe it's 8 hours. But honestly, like, even when I'm in the shop for either a 6 to 8 hour day, I honestly am probably only getting altogether a total of like 5 solid hours of stuff done, because I get distracted with social media, or like my back's killing me. And so I got to sit down and I'm answering emails, or I'm fucking around with something else that isn't actually pertaining to the project that I'm working on at hand. And so sometimes I wonder, like, what would happen if I did restrict my hours to only 4.5 hours a day, and I still had to be productive and get shit done.
I think you almost kind of have to somewhat schedule your day where you say from 8 to 10, like, if that means like literally leaving your phone out in the car. Mm-hmm. And it is amazing. Like, these days, everybody thinks that they need to have their phone on them so their wife can call them about whatever emergency is going to happen. Our parents all went to work for the last however many generations they've gone to work, and they left in the morning and said bye, and they said hi when they got home at night.
Sure. And
there was no contact for 8, 10, 12, 16 hours, whatever your work shift was.
Yeah.
And I do think sometimes, speaking from experience, like, you have to be able to tell that spouse, like, I'm unavailable. Like, and my phone will be in the car. No offense to you or anybody else, but like, that distraction has to be removed. And it takes a lot of discipline to hear your phone vibrate and not look at it. And the next thing you know, you're an hour into Instagram or a chat. Yeah. I think scheduling that, where you schedule that 8 to 10, I'm not doing anything but my work. And then 10 to 11, I'm just going to schedule in a break. Yeah. And that break's going to involve business.
Yeah.
Like, on my phone, maybe some personal with my wife or with whoever, or say 11 to 12. And then there again, from 12 to 2, like, the phone's going back out in the car.
Yeah.
Where it's completely taken away, like a child with a toy.
Sure.
It
goes on timeout.
Seriously. And I think that's almost the only way. And I struggle with that too. And that is the hard thing about being a knife maker. It's not that other stuff's not important. Like, the time you spend interacting with a customer on Instagram, or the time that you spend writing an email or doing some of that, is absolutely important. But I think they're definitely, and I'm working on this myself, where it needs to be scheduled.
Yeah.
Where you can actually be as productive as possible. Like you say, you might only have 4 hours a day that you actually end up making knives during that day, but it might be the most 4 hour productive. It might be the most productive 8 hours you've ever spent in your shop.
Sure.
And you only worked for 4.
Yeah.
But you actually freaking worked for 4 straight hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've turned off like all my notifications on everything except for like text messages. And, but from all social media and everything, just because at a certain point, there's just too much stuff going on. And it is easy to get sucked in. And as as isolating as this work is, it is also extremely social,
Mhm.
and you connect with people and make friends, and you want to keep up with those connections and see new stuff or whatever people are sharing. But yeah, I've had to turn them all off. And so the only way I can know if something's happening is if I actually go into an app. And then when I'm going into an app, it's because I have an intention for making a post about something that's coming up, or whether it's a story or an actual Instagram feed post. And then also, what else have I done? My phone has like this do not disturb feature, so I turn that on. So I only my wife or like my in-laws, if for whatever reason there's some weird emergency with the kid or something like that, they can get a hold of me. Otherwise, all of the phone calls, and that's probably actually why I missed your phone call the other day, is because
but even when I called you, it
disturb.
wasn't that important. Like
Yeah.
it can be talked about 4 hours later.
Sure. Yeah, and that's what I always tell people, like in my voicemail, I'm like, leave me a message because I will get back to you. But if you leave me a message, don't just say it's me. I know, I can see it on my phone. So if you got a question or you got something you need me to think about, tell me about that, so that when I call you back, then I can have something.
My new voicemail says, "Don't leave me a message, send me a text." I don't even want to listen to your voicemail.
I like that.
But at least like you say, if you get a text, you see something like, okay, I can get back to him on that tonight or a couple hours from now. Yeah. Or if it's absolutely critical, then you can answer it. Sure. But there's actually very few messages that come through that are actually critical.
Sure.
For that particular hour. Yeah. But
we do have one more question I found. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay. This is from Yerwin Nippenberg. He says, I think
nice pronunciation.
That's
impressive.
He sent me a voicemail, a voice thing, because I was butchering his name so many times, and so I practiced it, and I just kind of like randomly while I'm grinding out, I'll just practice words and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So Yerwin says, since you're the youngest ABS Mastersmith, you must be able to learn fast and pick new skills up quickly. What are, in your opinion, the best ways to learn quick and speed up your progress as a knife maker?
I kind of relearned a lot of what I had been taught. Like no offense to Rick Dunkerley, but like Rick had taught me a lot of the ways that he did stuff. But when Rick was teaching me, he was also in the early stages of him learning.
I got you.
So, sometimes you have to realize the person you're learning from might also be learning themselves, and you get exposed to new things. And Tim Hancock really re-taught me a lot of things of the way he was doing things. And it was huge for me when I learned to grind different, and there were some different things that I was doing that added that made it very easy for me to repeat processes exactly accurate. Even making like templates for daggers or templates for things that, say, a guard template for a knife that I want to make down the road, again, taking that extra little bit of time. When he talks about speeding up the process, a lot of that is implementing processes that are actually repeatable. And you don't spend a lot of time trying to fix screw ups, because every time you do something, you're doing it a different way.
Right. You're not constantly reinventing the wheel.
Yeah, exactly. And from the standpoint of that I learned fast, like I don't think I was anything special other than the fact that I did work hard.
Sure.
I would say that's probably my best attribute, is just working hard. I don't think I'm overly talented in any particular way. I actually feel like I struggle in certain ways, whether it's artistically or different ways, but maybe it's just lack of confidence in some things. But being willing to try new things, but that whole like making processes repeatable and really thinking through it. It's kind of funny, but one of the things that like changed my knife making game altogether is when I learned how to make folders, I started using calipers.
Oh, interesting.
And like, instead of measuring, like I tell knife makers all the time, one of the first things I'll ask people that are newer knife makers is, what are you measuring like your guard with? What are you measuring your blade with?
Sure.
Well, I have this millimeter ruler. Like I thought it was a big deal when I went from using a like 16ths and 8ths to millimeters.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
Well, I went from measuring in millimeters to literally measuring in thousandths.
Yeah.
Game changer.
Yeah.
Like entirely like measuring. And again, it sounds stupid, but I was a kid, like measuring drill bits and measuring holes and all this different stuff. And I'm like, literally the thickness of a line. I was like, okay, well, this millimeter, this side of the line. Well, now all of a sudden you're measuring with calipers. So I encourage everyone, you can buy cheap digital calipers.
Sure.
Just something simple as that can change your life with how you measure stuff.
Right.
Now, you also have to be willing to recognize that, okay, I don't own a surface grinder. Yes, this is 5 thousandths off, but last month I was measuring in millimeters. So if I'm 5 thousandths off, I'm still okay.
Yeah.
You know, so being willing to not go too deep down the rabbit hole of being so accurate when
Sure.
you don't have maybe the equipment to help you do that,
Right.
can slow you down. Accuracy sometimes slow you down too much, but those are some things of like being that accurate, say at the process of like fitting up a guard on a knife will then help everything that's mounted to that guard behind that.
Sure.
So taking the time to get some of those things right, you might take an extra hour on a guard, but it might save you hours in the rest of the process of the knife.
Yeah.
But
I mean, honestly, I think also just reps really help.
yeah.
As many reps as you can get in. I mean, honestly, when I was first starting and forging blades, you know, I had been forging blades for a couple of years before I then took a class at the New England School of Metalwork, their like intro to bladesmithing class. And like I said, I'd already been making knives for a couple of years on my own. And I took the class from Steve Culver, but what was really beneficial from the class is it forced you for a week and a half, almost 2 weeks, to be forging blades day in and day out nonstop. So you're just like constantly immersed in that, just like that one function, that one process, or part of the knife making process. And before that, like those first couple of years, I was forging maybe once or twice a month, but not very frequently. People often think you're forging every day. That's
Right.
definitely not the case.
No.
And so I would come back a month later and I'd be forging a knife and I'd be like, well, shit, the knife's going like this, but how do I fix that again?
Right.
But after that 2 weeks, it became muscle memory because I was just forced to forge so many blades in such a short period of time that it just like, and you work a lot of stuff out and it becomes more natural with the more reps you get. And so I think reps really plays a big
I think it's huge. And actually I've done that well at times and I've screwed that up at times. And sure. I can say, if you're going to go learn something new from a maker in a shop, the question is not, do you have time to go do it? The question is do you have time to come home and implement it? Because the reason I got so good at making liner lock folders when I did was I made one and then I made a bunch.
Yeah.
Like I literally, a year later, people were asking me if I had ever made a fixed blade. Because I went for like a year or two straight of only making folders.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And like very quickly going to knife shows, people just thought I was a folder maker. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, yeah, I freaking make Bowies and daggers and whatever, right? But I got good at doing that. Now, where I screwed that up is I went down to, twice. I've gone to Bill Rupel's to make a slip joint.
Okay.
Made one with him. And then because life was crazy and whatever, I got home and didn't come home and make one.
Yeah.
And now today, I think I could kind of make one, but man, it would be a struggle.
Yeah.
And I've always said to myself, if I go back and I've had offers to come back with him or some other guys, Luke Swenson. I am not going to waste Luke's time until I know when I go over there, I can come home and build about 3 or 4 in a row.
Right.
Because God dang, somebody comes to your shop and you spend all this time to teach them to be a chef's knife maker. And then it's a year before they go to try to do an S grind.
Right.
And it's like, I can't remember what he told me.
Sure.
So to your point, that's exactly right. Reps and being able to spend that time doing those reps.
It's hearing you talk about that, and part of our conversation earlier about how you wish that when you were younger and first starting out that you did more varied work. But it sounds like those reps from taking those orders and just being like, yeah, I want to take that money, helped get you those reps that helped really lock in those skills.
Some of that's definitely true. I think there's like a balance there that a person has to try to find.
Sure.
Where it's like, okay, I do need to do that again, or maybe again, but now I don't necessarily need to take 15 orders for it and do it 15 more times.
Sure. That's fair.
It's like, so finding that balance for sure. I think especially in core skills like blade grinding or blade forging.
Oh yeah, sure.
Once you have a couple of those core skills, you can then start to learn all the different kinds of colored chrome that you want to put on the car.
Yeah.
But you still have to be able to make the freaking car.
Right.
And that's really where I mean a lot of the stuff that I wished I would have been experimenting more, carving and all different kinds of things. But yeah, to your point, it's right. You got to do it more than once. And again, I think blade grinding is one of those. Oh, yeah. I always tell people start blade grinding before you start forging, in my opinion, if you really want to be a good knife maker, just because like you take a jacked up forged blade, it just makes your blade grinding that much harder. Like learn how to be a good grinder. And now when you start to forge, you can take your half-ass forging job and fix it.
Well, also you're grinding knowing what your finished product is going to look like before having to even forge it or without having to forge it. I feel like for me, it helps inform what I'm forging so that I am forging more to what I want it to look like when it's done and it's ground, rather than forging it kind of a rough shape and then having to do a ton of grinding work. I mean, it's a learning experience, but
you start to see
same thing. I tell people to start with grinding.
I had a guy send me a picture the other day. Hopefully he doesn't listen to this, but he sent me a picture. There's a bunch of hammer forged marks all over it, and he had ground it, finished his knife, and he's like, how do I get these hammer marks out? And I was like, well, two options. Don't hit it so fucking hard when it's thin.
Yeah.
Or what I think really was more of the issue is he still had a lot more grinding to do.
I got you.
And go thinner and you'll grind all those forging marks out. But you kind of have two options there. Either you're forging too thin. Yeah. And you could tell he was hitting with like the corner of his hammer and leaving some nasty marks in it.
Yeah.
Or most guys are really afraid to grind thin. They get to where they think it's good and they're like, oh, I'm going to screw this up, and they stop. Yeah. And it's like, okay, now you need to go like half as thick as you've got it.
Sure.
And that's kind of
you're only halfway there. Sorry.
It's kind of scary. Yeah.
Yeah.
Once you really become good at grinding and like this is what a finished blade should look like to your point, now you know kind of how far you can forge and still have some room to grind.
Yep.
But yeah.
Hell yeah. That's it. I think we did it.
All right. Oh, what do you see?
Oh, House Bear's got some questions.
It's a PE.
Okay.
Value in my early.
Okay, so House Bear is asking. So House Bear Forge is here in the chat, and he's asking, as a new maker, what do you see as the value of the JS and MS test / credentials? My background, I'm a PE professional engineer, and it had value early in my career to communicate my commitment to the profession. Now, 30 years into my career, I don't know what I don't know that it had the value that I thought it did. My desire to learn, develop, and grow has more value. Your thoughts?
That's actually, I think that's a really good question. If there's anybody that's capitalized, the most on the journeyman smith, master smith thing, like I think it's pretty clear that it's been me, from the standpoint of, becoming like the youngest or whatever, and obviously been able to kind of use that in our marketing, and it's definitely kind of a badge of honor of like this, because it is, when you think of, I have now a boy that's 14, and I think to myself, holy shit, like I passed my journeyman smith test when I was just barely 15.
Right.
Like I look at it now that I have kids that age, and it's, my daughter's about to turn 18. I was 19 when I did my Master Smith. Like there was definitely a big level of commitment.
Yeah.
And though sometimes I discredit how good of a knife maker I was back then, there's no doubt that I had a shit ton of like desire and drive that most kids don't have. So I'm probably somewhat the wrong person to ask, even though, and the right person, from the standpoint of I got a lot out of that. What I tell people now, and really back then, back to the very, very beginning of our conversation, the Master Smith, Journeyman Smith thing was way bigger deal for your career in the like late 80s, early 90s, even to like 2000, right? When I passed my Master Smith in 2000, that was a big deal. Still, there were knife collectors out there buying like only Master Smith's knives.
Yeah.
People would come up to your table. Now you're a Master Smith. Now I can buy your knife. I tell people nowadays, I think the American Bladesmith Society is a great organization. I think if you're a forger, you should be a member of it. I think it's been the most consistent organization of they kind of are what they are. It's the promote and preserve the art of the forged blade. That being said, and I what I tell people with the Master Smith and the Journeyman Smith thing is you should do it if it's like as a personal challenge.
Sure.
And I think it does force someone. Well, I think two things. One, it's just like, to me, it's a lot like going on Forged in Fire. Does winning Forged in Fire mean a ton for Mareko's career? I kind of doubt it. However, for both of us, just going on there and kind of putting like your reputation on the line, you kind of have to like, you kind of have big nuts to do that, because you're also putting yourself out there to potentially fail in front of the nation. And if you go lay 5 knives, like I don't care how good Mareko is, if he is going to take 5 knives into Atlanta and lay them down in front of Master Smith judges, he's going to be nervous. Like that's a
100%.
And Mareko's clearly got the ability to be a Master Smith knife maker, but you haven't done it until you've done it. And it's definitely like, to me, there's a respect to the people that are still willing to like put themselves out there to be judged. Mm-hmm. So you can think you're good enough, but there's a difference between that and doing it. Sure. Now, that being said, I don't begrudge anybody that hasn't done it. And there's a shit ton of knife makers out there that can blow the doors off a lot of master bladesmiths. So I don't think it's an automatic credibility. If I would have not improved a bit since I passed that test, I could still call myself a Master Smith, and I'd be making some really shitty knives. And there's guys that have done that, right? Where like they look at it as the end. That was the end. And to me, I looked at it like that was kind of the beginning.
Yeah. Interesting.
So honestly, today, if you go past your Master Smith test in Atlanta, the phone's probably not going to ring the next day because of it. Like it's not going to change your career. It's not going to make your career. It's really almost not going to matter. It is a cool thing to be able to say. But really what's going to matter is the work that you make and the job that you do on your social media channels, your marketing, your follow through with customers on email. It's going to be the totality of your work. I don't encourage anyone to go do that test just for the business side of it, because you're going to be disappointed.
Sure.
Nowadays, when people pass their test in Atlanta, I don't even hardly hear about it. Right. In the 80s, when you passed your Master Smith test, it was in every magazine. Like, here's the new master. It was a big deal. Yeah. That being said, I still think I've heard arguments about the test. Like, is it still relevant? Should they change it? Should they have a new category? Should they have Grandmaster and all that stuff? I mean, I think the ABS is what it is. It's a standard test. It's kind of been what it is. I think you still have to be a very good maker to pass it. There's still a lot of guys, even today, with all the technology and all the information in the world, that go down there and fail that test. Yeah. So you have to still make a damn good knife to pass it. But I also, in the same sense, don't think that that makes you all of a sudden an elite knife maker on the planet, because I think you can pass that with a relatively moderate amount of skill as long as you pay attention to the detail and you're just not lazy on your finish.
Sure.
You know, so I would never want to get across that I don't think the Mastersmith test is valuable or important, but I think it's really more in a self-value that you set out on a path with some goals, and then you put yourself out to be judged, and you accomplished it. You passed it.
Sure. So it sounds like you're saying like the greater value is what you learn about yourself and what you're capable of through the challenge of building those knives for that test.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think even a guy like Mareko who builds chef's knives would be forced to do stuff out of your element.
Oh yeah.
And in the end, you probably wouldn't sell any more knives because of it, but you would also probably consider yourself a better, more well-rounded maker.
Sure.
But it also is, for a full-time custom knife maker, you do kind of have to balance, frankly, the business side of like, is it worth this much time and effort for me to, if you were to do that, you'd have to commit probably a good 6 months of your next year to pass that test. And, every maker has to weigh out the decision of, is this worth it to me to do, from a financial perspective, and, just your goals in life and whatnot. And, Will Stelter, for example, is somebody that's doing his journeyman this year. He just tested his performance at my shop here about a month ago. Does Will need that journeyman certification? No. But I think Will likes the idea of the respect level that will maybe come from some of his peers. And it forces him, it does force you to sit down and be perfect. You can't kind of say like, oh, it's good enough. There's one little teeny tiny thing wrong with my knife here, but it's fine. I'll sell it. The customer doesn't know or won't even care.
Right.
Really not, and truly not a big deal in the scheme of things, but that shit won't fly at the test.
Right.
So, and what you learn through it, if you were to make a Quillian dagger for it, or, something like that, you're going to learn things that are going to probably make you a better maker, but, I hope that answers it. It's not, I just don't think it's going to change your career. As far as the value going forward, kind of like your engineering degree, I think it's actually quite similar. I look at that Mastersmith test back then, maybe say, take me out of the picture as a kid doing it. And like, if I look at a guy like Rick Dunkerley or Shane Taylor, I don't think today they look back at that as like some major landmark that changed their career or that like made their career. But I think it was definitely validating at the time. And it definitely at that time helped validate you as like, yeah, this guy's a serious maker and has reached a certain level. Now what's he going to do? Is he going to settle, or is he going to like get better?
Yeah.
I think much like when you come out of college, I guarantee you're a lot better engineer 30 years later than you were when you came out of college.
I sure hope so. I sure hope so.
But
cool.
Yeah, man.
Did we do it?
Yeah, did it.
Mr. April 2020. There'll be another, he'll be back in about 5 years. All he's going to be wearing is an apron.
Yeah.
For the next calendar.
Yeah. It ain't a little cotton top shot. I'll just have this all gray hair. Just gray hair and an apron.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you, everybody, for jumping in and hanging out and checking this out and catching it. To all of you who are catching it later. Again, if you would like to be part of the conversation and to have the opportunity to talk with very extremely talented makers like Mr. Josh Smith here, and to ask them questions directly, it's an opportunity that you don't really get very often, and which I think is really valuable, especially to be able to have these kind of questions answered. Go check out the Patreon. Jump in at I told my brain just died. illuminated individual level or higher, and you'll be able to be part of these conversations. You'll be able to see them and catch them later, even after they've been streamed live. And I just want to thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Josh Smith, for your time. We're gonna have some fun. We're gonna head over into the shop now and get the fire going, and I'm gonna have a cup of coffee finally.
Yeah,
and we're gonna get the day started. We're gonna have some fun.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. It's been cool. And I think it's inspiring to other knife makers, to the fact that like we met through a competition.
Yeah.
We're quote unquote competitors in our industry. But it shows that we can work together and, be in different sides of the art form and do different things, but still be friends. And, it's cool having you here. And I'm honored to have you, helping us out with our company and, doing the chef's knife stuff. So I'm looking forward.
I'm flattered that you reached out and wanted to work with me too. So it.
Well, the other 20 knife makers said no. Finally, Morocco said yes. So no.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you guys. Bye.